Hi, welcome back. In the last part we finished off our tube here and I showed you how to come along and add these with a motion path and an animation snapshot. Now I've taken the liberty of getting them into more of an appropriate size, which took all of 30 seconds once the initial placement had been done along that animation snapshot. In this part I want to look at modeling this back piece here, this sort of curved back piece along with this port that our wire plugs into. So there are many ways of doing this particular piece. I'm going to start with a simple polygon cube, because right now we've looked at not smoothing geometry, or not smoothing geometry that would have a hard edge on it. So if I come in here, we can have a look at some of the problems we might encounter. I'm just going to keep scaling this so it's a little bit bigger than my original one, because my original one didn't have the curve on the back. It's actually much more difficult to make this piece with a curved back. So let's have a look at how we might go about that. And I'm going to have to go by eye this way. So I'll just get it slightly wider than the tube and that should be okay. So what we want on this is a curved back. So if I just zoom into the reference there, you can see this whole back piece is curved. Now if we were going to smooth this, this would be an extremely simple operation. We just multi-cut or edge loop, so control here and one here, and then even if I just put one here, just for example, and press 3, you'll see that that's smoothed out. It's got a totally curved back and we're all good to go. The problem is it then comes to the fact that I've got these non-hardened edges again. So many ways to solve this. I'm going to show you a way that is perhaps a fairly complicated way of doing it, but I want to illustrate the principle of how we can use this smooth geometry to then create our own kind of geometry. So now we've got our basic shape. I'm going to go to Mesh, Smooth. Okay, and that gives me this, which is about the shape I need. But again, we've got that problem now of these sort of non-hardened edges here. So I'm going to first of all simplify this shape by cutting away some faces, and this is better done in this view. So I'm going to cut away all these front faces we need, because we don't want this to be all curvy and stuff. So that puts us back to a very straight piece, which is very nice. Okay, and then let's look at the back. So we're on unsmooth geometry right now. We've actually smoothed it in Maya. Now we'll need to close this hole on the front, which we can actually do, but I won't do it yet because I want to simplify this geometry. So I'm going to come in and actually I'm going to select these top faces. So if I do this by camera selection, that will make it much easier. So let's go into the top view and let's move our object. In fact, let's select our object mode, and let's move our object out here. And I'm going to focus in on both views, and now I'm going to use the drag selector on face mode with camera selection turned on. And this will only allow me to then select the faces I can see on the camera. So if we come in and have a look what that's done, you can see I'm only selecting those faces that it's possible for me to see on this camera. Oops, and I wanted to really hold shift there, of course. So as I said, there are actually easier ways of creating this same piece of geometry, but I really wanted to show you how we could, really cut up a smooth model to do the same thing. Now, if you didn't want to use the camera selection, you can of course just come into the side view. Again, I just wanted to show you a few different ways of doing this sort of thing, and just select all the faces like so. Once I've got these faces, I'm going to go to Mesh, Extract, and that will give me a separate object with just these faces. I'm then going to scale this object downwards so it's completely flat, because I want a completely flat object here. I do not, and I've scaled it a bit too far there because the normals have flipped. So I think I've got a completely flat object now. I have, and I can always just go to normals, reverse. There we go. So I've got a completely flat object, or near as, damn it, anyway. So now I can start making the determination if some of this geometry on this object can come out, and indeed some of it can. So I don't actually need, let's see, edge mode. I don't actually need, let's see where there's edges and loops that I can get rid of. I shouldn't need any of this stuff. Okay, so let's just delete the edge on that. And the rest seems fairly essential. Okay, I could probably strip it down a bit more and retopologize, but I'm not going to. So, face mode, select them all, extrude it upwards till it's approximately the size that you need it to be. There we go. We can always scale that later. Then select the vertex just to make sure these are all nice and straight. Let's come in and scale them down until they're flat. Okay, so we should have flat verts on the top and bottom. And there we go. There is our shape. But now we don't have all that extra geometry created by the smooth. We can also come in and do our own chamfers across our edges. So for instance, I can take this edge now and just go to edit mesh and bevel. Okay, and that whole thing disappears, so I might have to delete the history of this. Edit, delete by type, history, and then I'm going to go to freeze transformations, and I'll also go to no, that should actually do it. Alright, now I should be able to go to the edge, mesh, bevel, sorry, edit mesh, bevel, and there you go. So I get that nice hard edge bevel that I wanted. In our case, of course, I want a bevel around the whole thing, so let's just edge selection, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and bevel. Okay, now I can increase the size of that because we went to all this trouble to get it, so let's increase the size and maybe a fraction of 0.4. There, done. Now, this now is still looking a little jagged around the edges, but to be honest with you, this is such a small component, I'd probably never shoot it from closer than this. However, if we did want to have it higher res, we could have started with just a higher level of smoothing on the original object. You can, of course, always smooth this one. If you don't require such sharp edges, there you go. But to be honest, I want those sharp edges, so we're going to do it like so. So even though if you're doing a hard surface object, you can start out with high-res geometry, like we've done with this pipe, you can always start out with low-res geometry, create the shapes you need, and then extrapolate from that the high-res geometry that you need afterwards with these sharp edges. Okay, so just going to make sure that bisects like so, and that should about do it for that piece. So let's make the other piece that we need, which would be, let's check the reference, which would be this piece on the back here, which is just a shrunken half sphere. So this will be substantially easier because I can just start with a sphere, and this one I'll just smooth. It'll be much easier, and I'm just going to, in fact, why am I doing that? I'll put it on in place on the reference, and there we go. Okay, let's get that approximately into position, and then R to scale it up like so, and then I can just take the faces off it. This one I'm actually just going to smooth. I could have started out higher res, but really in this case I think we can get away with just smoothing. So let's have a look at that, and we're going to have to close this in on the back view just so it's slightly wider than the pipe. Let's have a look. That seems to be about right. Okay, we are just slightly wider than our pipe. When we smooth it, we'll shrink a tiny bit, but that's fine. And let's select all the faces now. Come in and extrude that outwards. And whoops, my extrusions obviously need to be reset. And now I can extrude outwards just a little bit. There we go, just like so. Okay, so let's fit this piece to this bottom piece. There we go, let's see if it fits. And the bottom piece might not be quite wide enough, or quite far enough back. As I say, we don't actually have a image plane of this particular view, but we don't really need one either. There we go. Okay, so let's smooth this out. And even though it's smoothed out, we still want a somewhat hard edge on it. So 1 to unsmooth. And let's cut in a couple of edge loops to try and hold the edge on this a little bit at least. So one along the bottom for a start will be needed. There we go, that holds that bottom edge a bit better. And you could come in now if you wanted to, and let me just flick that back to 1. You could, in fact, let me take that edge loop out. That should have done it. There we go. Has it? Yep. And let's just try a bevel on this. You could still bevel objects that are smooth. That's fine. You won't quite get as nice a chamfer, but you don't always need it. So I'm going to select from here, and then here, and then here, and here, and I'm just double clicking once again to get those edge loops. And just in case we ever go for the extreme close-up, let's do it on the inside too. And that should be all the edges that I want to bevel, and I'm going to select Mesh, Bevel. Sorry, Edit Mesh. Okay, and that will give me that chamfer on the outside that I would like to increase just a little bit. So fraction, let's say 0.4. And let's see if that's okay. Yeah, it doesn't appear to be too bad. But let's say, yeah, 0.5 maybe. And I'm actually going to give it an extra segment as well. So I'm going to make the roundness 0 of that. I don't want that to appear rounded. A roundness of 1 would make it appear much more rounded. And then I'm going to smooth. And I get a somewhat hard edge. Now I can also make sure that those edges are actually hard by going to display polygons, hard edges, and I've got a hard edge around there, so that's about as hard as it's going to get while it's smooth, but that's absolutely fine for this piece because it's a little, tiny piece. You don't always have to do everything the hard way. Okay, and I think this thing should completely bisect my tube, so I'm going to select all of its bottom vertex and just shove them so they completely bisect the tube. Okay, there we go. So really a huge amount of ways to do things within Maya, which if you've been using it for any time you probably already know. But I quite like the fact that we managed to collapse this entire box in on itself with a smooth geometry. And then we just sliced off the top faces and extruded from there. So there are many, many different ways to create shapes in Maya. Doing it this way allowed us to keep that very hard chamfer along the edges. This geometry is now not smoothed. It would look like this if it was. We don't get that hard edge at all. We get a very hard edge across it now. And we can just check that we couldn't make that any harder, of course, by going to display polygons, and let's just check its hard edges. And there you go, we've got hard edges all along. Perfect, what we want. Now, with a more rounded piece like this, I reckon we get away with not having quite such a hard edge. Not everything has a very extreme chamfer on it like so. These more rounded pieces can often have a softer edge. Alright, so in the next part we're going to look at finishing off the the last of the detailing on the back piece. So we've got these kind of cylinders to put in. That should be no issue whatsoever. I'm also going to show you how we can replicate this around the object so we don't end up, again, moving, rotating and all that silliness. We just want to put it in all three positions at once. So I'll be back in a moment, and I hope you found something useful from this exercise. Thank you very much for watching.